Do they realize how dramatic the situation is in this country and how quickly a country that once was a young, promising democracy just a few years back now is turning into a full-scale dictatorship?
If someone in Tbilisi is wondering why Washington is not responding to their requests, they probably should ask themselves how reasonable they are, how acceptable they are, how constructive they are.
This will reshape, I would say, the security architecture of Europe and broadly the New World Order.
When it comes to jazz versus autocracies, there is no autocracy that has prevailed over jazz.
Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia, an English podcast covering Georgian and regional politics. The Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of high-quality news and analysis, and GSAC, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. To dive into the key developments of Georgian and the US politics, today we'll be joined by Mr. Zviad Adzinbaia, Ph.D. fellow at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at the Tufts University. Zviad is also co-founder and managing partner of LeadX, a premier leadership accelerator for young people across Europe and Eurasia. Zviad worked at a number of important places, including the European Parliament, also NATO Defense College. He's one of the pioneers of using digital diplomacy and modern technology to support democracy and counter disinformation across the world. And last but not least, he is a passionate jazz enthusiast who genuinely believes that using music and arts as leverage has an enormous potential to bring wider societal changes, and he pledges to hold a joint jazz session in his hometown of Gali in the occupied Abkhazia, of course, when Georgia gets reunited. Mr. Adzinbaia, welcome to the show. Please feel free to add anything to my short introduction. Maybe tell us more your story from Zugdidi fish market to one of the most prestigious universities in the United States before we get down to business, which is to Talk Georgia.
Georgi, thank you very much. It's fantastic to be connecting to Georgia from the United States. This is my second acquired homeland now. It's fantastic to be talking Georgia because Georgia needs to be discussed and Georgia needs to be actioned in so many ways. My story is I am as old as independent Georgia, specifically, and starting from Abkhazia and then growing up in the adjacent town, Zugdidi, where my family and I had to become fish entrepreneurs, growing up and transitioning from a war-torn society into a new life that we didn't know what it would come with. So I grew up there, and the first business, first interaction, first real life experience was actually facing customers about something they needed every day. This feels like facing customers. We have to face customers daily, whether it's politics, whether it's corporations, whether it's media. We have to be accountable. We have to give them fresh fish, in a sense, fresh idea. A comparative example would be fresh of anything, because what customers needed when I was growing up was fresh, good tasting fish. Now, what I try to offer them in my present life is a fresh idea that looks like fish, that glows like fish, and that might taste as good fish, right? Currently, I'm in the United States, at the intersection of international security, diplomacy, artificial intelligence, and wider societal affairs, digital diplomacy, as you noted. And we always, my friends and myself, always try to apply anything. Of course, in the first place, we do to Georgia, and then things that Georgians and Georgia are concerned about. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that as a continuous effort of ours.
Okay, let's dive into the Georgian politics and the current developments of Georgian politics, Zviad. We are in deep trouble, to be honest, because political parties are being banned, political leaders are behind bars. What else? Again, voting rights of Georgian diaspora is being restricted. Tomorrow will be 1 year since the Georgian Dream Prime Minister basically publicly said that he is removing Georgia's Euro integration agenda from, if Georgia's Euro integration from the agenda, which they successfully did. There is an enormous pressure on independent media, civil society organizations. Georgia, in terms of numbers of political prisoners per capita, Georgia is basically surpassed Russia already. So we are effectively in the club of autocracies next to Belarus and Azerbaijan and Russia. So what is your, again, every single day, it's been 364th consecutive days a day that people are taking streets, they're going out to Rustaveli Avenue and protesting Ivanishvili's regime, illegitimate regime. So what is your assessment of the situation in Georgia, and how does it look from the United States, and what does friends and allies of Georgia are saying? Do they realize how dramatic the situation is in this country, and how quickly a country that once was a young, promising democracy just few years back now is turning into a full-scale dictatorship? A country where they invested a lot of time and effort and money and, all that is going down the drain.
$1 million question, if not more expensive. Thank you very much, Georgi. I live in the United States, but I'm Georgian, so it hurts me as a citizen, as a Georgian, as someone who was born and grew up there. What is going on there? Because one thing that has happened is that the Georgian people have been deceived and have been attacked their choice. The European Union integration agenda seems like a big jargon. This is not a jargon. This is a choice of your family, of my family, of hundreds of thousands in Georgians, and a choice that is not any recent choice, that is historical choice. This is not a term that is inaccessible or should be in any way inaccessible to the most ordinary, to the extraordinary citizens of Georgia, because this is a choice that they support, back up, and even more, that they have sacrificed their lives for, be it on political battlefields, be it in fighting foreign missions, be it in fighting, invading enemies domestically. So this is a very conscious choice of Georgians. No government is entitled, current one, or any future one, is entitled to touch that without a distinctive buy-in and input and position and permission of the Georgian people. Georgian people haven't consented to harming Georgian democracy. Georgian people have not said, this is not my opinion at all, I'm just reciting. Georgian people have not granted anybody a privilege to derail Georgia from its chosen path. That is not a government path. That is Georgian people path. Any government proclaiming to represent Georgia is obliged constitutionally and morally to guide Georgia towards the path of Europe and towards the path of liberty and prosperity that is attached to Europe, that also is coupled with security writ large. So in that sense, Georgia is in quite a deep trouble currently, because something that citizens chose is now being harshly attacked. And Georgia's partners and allies, while they're also dealing with a very deep, nothing less important continental security and future global security issues, are deeply troubled trying to pay as much attention, but also are being consumed by what we're seeing on a daily basis in Ukraine. So to sum it up, and maybe we could unpack this with some follow-up questions. To sum it up, Georgia doesn't look good. What looks good in Georgia is the only the only public institution that functions. That is people power. People power is the only legitimate public institution that is functional, that is hopeful, that is continuous, that is extremely persistent, and that keeps the light shining on the streets of Georgia, in the families of Georgia, and in the public square of Georgia for a nonstop 1 year now. I think this is what gives me hope as one individual looking at Georgia from abroad.
Let's keep fingers crossed. I also trust in people's power, and this is the key, I would say, key reason why the protest stands and resistance stands still. You mentioned the global security issues, and I think that we need to zoom out a little bit of the situation that is in Georgia and take a look what all the eyes are now directed at. The United States, U.S. President brokered possible peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. Also the scandal that erupted recently about Mr. Witkov and Mr. Ushakov. The phone call that was leaked where Witkov was basically advising Putin how to massage the ego of the American president. Do you see the deal coming? How do you see that? And I'm sure, it might be difficult at this stage. There are a lot of things were said and done about this, and a lot of experts say that the peace deal is quite distant, even though, a lot of work has been done. But I think the time will come and the peace deal will be there, and more earlier or later. And this will reshape, I would say, the security architecture of Europe and broadly the New World Order. So how do you see this deal, and what in your opinion, what will be the impact on the Georgia and the wider region?
Deal in any shape or form that we will see at some point, if not immediately, at some point we have to see something, will have direct effect on Georgia's security, on Georgia's democracy, on Georgia's economic development and ultimate future. So I think every Georgian that wants its his or her country prosperous, secure, and developed should be hoping that Ukraine gets a favorable deal and Ukraine emerges as a stronger, significantly scaled up and strengthened power within the Black Sea and within the European space. I do hope that we see it in the best ways that we hope as citizens and as supporters of Ukraine. I think alignment, regardless of every ongoing aspect, sometimes pleasant and sometimes unpleasant to see. I think ultimately the United States, Europeans and Ukrainians are much more logical and much more feasible to align on one page. Sometimes that might be, as it's characteristic of such quite complex diplomacy process, we might see some things that our ears or our eyes might not be pleased with, but this is not what ultimately will happen. This is an ongoing conversation, and the United States is trying to bring an end to this really, really heavy war. Now, what guides U.S. foreign policy is the priorities of U.S. foreign policy, but also one thing that usually guides a lot of decisions in the case of the United States is the voters. That matters for a core democracy like the United States. And polls actually show quite consistently, increasingly and sustainably pro-Ukrainian position among the Republicans and Democrats. So I think that this is, of course, visible for everyone involved. And this is visible for the Ukrainians. This is visible for everybody else, even for the Russians, that American people are quite vividly pro-Ukraine. And by pro-Ukraine, they're also displaying their values and principles and their commitment to it. They've been quite persistent. So I think that no one knows what deal we will see in the foreseeable or short-term or midterm future. But if a deal doesn't happen next week or in the coming week, I don't think this will be because of the Ukrainians and Americans not aligning. I think they do have alignment at this point. The deal might not happen as it hasn't happened because of Russia. And I think that what matters here is that Americans and Ukrainians be on the same page as much as the rest of the European powers. That gives the ultimate power to Ukraine and its success on the battlefield, but also on the diplomatic front.
Okay, interesting. Let's move to U.S.-Georgia relations, which is, I think, at the moment it is at its lowest point that I remember myself, and I've been observing that at least for the last 30 years. Georgia is no longer a strategic partner for the United States. We don't have an ambassador here stationed. Obviously, Ivanishvili is trying to settle this somehow. He's trying to send letters almost every week. But I think President Donald Trump and his administration seems to be kind of disengaged. And what makes it again, what angers, I would say, the Georgian Dream government is that, okay, U.S. is engaged with Armenia very actively. They are engaged with Azerbaijan. So the Central Asia, you name it, even with Belarus, and Trump regularly holds talks with Lukashenko. And these guys are saying, you are talking to almost every dictator in the world, so we are not worse than they are. Why don't you talk to us? So my question to you, Zviad, is that, okay, why is this disengagement? Because of the unimportance of Georgia for President Trump and his administration, or because Ivanishvili is doing something fundamentally wrong, and he, in his attempt to, just somehow settle this relation and find some joint points, they are doing things fundamentally wrong. So what's going on here?
No, I don't think the administration handles Georgia as a less important case. We should not forget that it was President Trump's first term when Georgia got Javelin anti-tank missiles alongside Ukraine. That was only one signal. You remember Vice President Pence visiting Tbilisi at the time. So those are two immediate examples that we could name that Georgia as a country, as a society, and as a player has not decreased in importance. I think that a lot is going in the world, and on the one hand, everybody has to compete for constructive attention. By constructive attention, you name it, players like Finland, players like other European powers do get attention because they come to Washington with a constructive agenda, with an agenda that is forward-looking, mutually beneficial, and that does not contradict their societies. They have the permission from the societies to govern. They have the permission from their societies to represent. The current Georgian bureaucracy is not perceived as such. And sometimes it is not difficult to see that senior members of both chambers of U.S. Congress voice alarms and concerns. And sometimes someone in Tbilisi might forget that they too are the government. When someone from the Capitol Hill says something here, hear it, because they are the government, part of the government, a fundamental part of the government chosen by the American people. But I think that if someone in Tbilisi is wondering why Washington is not responding to their requests, they probably should ask themselves how reasonable they are, how acceptable they are, how constructive they are, and how acceptable at the end of the day, how desirable they are as representatives of people. Georgians have said that they're not desirable, but the Americans are reflecting it in a way. Cutting a deal in America works differently. If you look at American history, Americans usually don't compromise on some of the foundational values that America is about. And Georgia was, for a long time, perceived as democracy. And when you are perceived as democracy, when you're enlisted in a club of a few, you have to represent higher values of how governance is conducted, how leadership is conducted, and how the people that gave you that power are treated. It is a big mistake to measure Georgia next to Belarus, even now, because Belarus is a different society, is a different system, is a different country with a different ambition. Georgia is a different country with its own merit. And Georgia is treated as such. It's unfortunate that in this very historically significant moment, Georgia is not represented by someone who would have the ability not only to protect their own image, but advance countries' vital, historic, and strategic interests. The only effort that the current bureaucracy in Tbilisi, with their representatives here in Washington, take is to protect their face. Speaking from a perspective of diplomacy, you don't want to add one more problem to your bucket. Like what you're bringing to the table of diplomacy. On the one hand, you have harmed your own cities, people, individuals, boys, girls, mothers, fathers, incarcerated hundreds, have not explained, do not have free courts, do not have large economy. What's your source of attraction, right? What's your source of attraction in a potential partnership, in a future partnership? It is really unfortunate what's going on, but it's not illogical at all.
Interesting. Then let's continue with MEGOBARI Act, because which is also, I believe, part of Georgia-US relations. And the MEGOBARI Act is being stalled now. Well, even though there is bipartisan support, overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle, but even though it is now stalled, and my question to you is that why is happening? Because it is, for example, the Georgian Dream is successfully lobbying to create hurdles for the MEGOBARI Act, or is it Trump's administration who might not want to take extra commitment? Because, if MEGOBARI Act is adopted, that will put pressure on Trump's administration basically to monitor situation in Georgia, and every 3 months or every 6 months they need to kind of find people who are working for Chinese or Russian or Iranian interests or undermining democracy, and then sanction these people. So then that's a lot of extra work. And commitment they might not the that is important now when they are dealing with Russia, with Ukraine, with Venezuela, some other the African, countries where they are engaged.
Yeah, well, one thing that one should not forget, Georgi, is that MEGOBARI Act has 98 senators currently supporting it, and that by any measure does not show lack of support. Its support is abundant. And again, United States is a democracy of a very specific sort. And you almost never have 100% alignment. And it goes beyond my explanation and beyond my knowledge why things are stalled the way they are. But the support is present with MEGOBARI Act and beyond MEGOBARI Act within the two chambers of legislation on Capitol Hill. And we will probably know as much as everybody will how things evolve. But I do hope that before the year closes, things change and MEGOBARI is adopted as a key instrument. One thing actually to note is that acting upon MEGOBARI Act from the executive perspective is optional. They're not mandated or obliged, but it gives them an additional instrument to choose or not, or to choose in the ways that they see fit to do things in Georgia. And I think people understand that, and I think that I don't think the reason that MEGOBARI Act is not passed yet, even though several instances have been successfully left behind, I don't think it's because of anyone's necessary resistance here that they would have extra burden. U.S. diplomacy arm is big enough to be able to afford an interest and consideration towards Georgia. I don't think that's a problem at all. But I think that the idea that Georgian people deserve a good country, a good bureaucracy, a good process, a respect, a rule of law, and successful governance writ large is shared here across the board. And it does not necessarily need one administration to another administration, because if you remember, many might not, that Georgia has always been a bipartisan issue in the United States and continues to be.
Okay, so let's continue with the U.S. politics. The midterm elections are within a year, so I think they are pretty close. And my interest is that, okay, what does public opinion say about that? Because we know that, well, now Trump enjoys majority in both houses, so that gives him kind of quite a lot of leverage to do stuff pretty quickly, even without asking some of the stuff. But again, midterm elections are always kind of this is how the society measures how president performed within the first half of his term. So again, what does public opinion say about that, and who's got a better chance to control the House and Senate? And in your opinion, do a lot of things depend how Trump, for example, handles Ukrainian issue to that elections? And finally, if Democrats basically succeed in regaining control over the legislature, how would that change U.S. policy, well, towards Ukraine, towards Georgia, or would that change at all? And would that limit President Trump's ability to do what he's doing now, for example?
Well, everybody, Georgi, no one knows what the outcome of the midterms will be, and obviously, the incumbent, the current administration wants the results to be in their favor, and there's no one who doesn't want to win elections. I'm a Georgian here, guest in this country, so I'll be moderate and polite in commenting on those. But as much as analysis goes, I think both parties are betting very much on the midterms, given that the importance of midterms usually, and specifically also this time and next year, will be quite high on the foreign policy front and on the domestic front. Ukraine is a bipartisan issue here when it comes to the chambers of legislation. Republicans and Democrats have supported and do support Ukraine. So I think you might see some light shifts when it comes to ways foreign policy is conducted, but ultimately the support towards Ukraine is vivid. It will also depend on what kind of to develop some kind of analytical framework here. It also depends on by the time where the Ukraine issue is, right? Because where it is now, it will certainly not be the same in a year from now or in 10 months from now. So we will need to be a little patient when we assess the potential ramifications of midterms to see what's the starting point by the time that midterms happen. There is one thing that Democrats won several elections, as you saw, mayoral in New York and so on and so forth. But we should not also forget that those are clearly Democratic spots. Some of the places like New York did not even have Republican contenders, because this is how those elections usually go there in those states. Very interesting. Sociologically and politically, analytically, very interesting processes campaign-wise, especially. But again, it would be a mistake for anyone, purely speaking theoretically here, it would be a mistake to determine potential outcomes of the next year's midterms based on the outcomes we saw a couple of weeks ago, because those are slightly different places and different processes and different frameworks apply there. And I think that when it comes to Georgia, I don't think midterms would change anything, because midterms are midterms. They're not always for foreign policy driven, but Georgia is not as big of a case. There's one thing that, well, it's sociologically interesting, but there's a significant amount of voters who care about Ukraine, about Eastern Europe, given their legacy. Many of them are Baltic Americans, Polish Americans, Ukrainian Americans to that end. And it would be obviously up to them how much they prioritize the foreign policy issue versus issues of bread and butter. So we will have to see. But I think that when Georgia is back on the American agenda, it would not be because of midterms. It would be because Georgia has come back with a conscious effort to a U.S. foreign policy conversation, from which it's absent now.
Interesting. Let's come back to Georgia. And I mentioned it at the beginning of the program that you are a jazz enthusiast, and you pledged that there will be joint jazz session in your hometown of Gali when Georgia gets reunited. We all would be happy to be part of that jazz session. But my worries is that, again, jazz is a universal symbol of freedom, and that freedom bringing anywhere brings a lot of positive changes. But playing jazz in the center of Tbilisi, because of the situation what we have now when our freedom is so much curbed, is under a certain question mark. So don't you think that we need to play jazz in Tbilisi first before we bring it to Gali?
Well, Georgi, one day we have to play jazz in Gali when Georgia is reunited, as you mentioned. This is of course my dream and your dream and our aspiration, and this is not a project to be carried out, but an ideal to be fulfilled. And I do hope, and I do believe that one day, and hopefully soon enough, then later, we'll be able to do that. That will be a symbol of a future secure, safe, and very progressive Georgia. When it comes to jazz versus autocracies, there is no autocracy that has prevailed over jazz. But jazz as an instrument and as a highly powerful art form that that started here in this very country I am, has been a driver of a lot of change, a driver of a lot of higher human ideas and ideals. And I think that be it in Tbilisi, be it in central Georgia or in Abkhazia, I cannot envision anybody who can harm the rhythms and harmony of jazz. Sometimes we might be seeing shocks on a daily basis in Tbilisi, and no one can tell it better than people being on the ground and fighting the daily battles for their own countries, for our own countries. And if anyone deserves a good tune and rhythm and harmony of music and jazz, it's them in the first place, and then everybody else. But I think that I am confident that as much as this country has played a lot of jazz domestically, has changed a lot domestically, but also on the global stage, jazz should be a symbol of a fundamental change in Georgia immediately. Actually, when it comes to the current democratic movement, I would not say these are not protests. This is a movement. This is a strategic movement of strategic significance, movement of strategic meaning. Protest is only one form of resistance, but movement includes many sorts of protests itself. So I think what we're seeing in Georgia is not just a protest, but it's a conscious choice of strategic significance that has attracted thousands and thousands across the country. And I think that jazz is just a fitting example to be a symbol of it.
Okay, let's finish with that positive note. Zviad, thank you very much for being with me. Thanks for watching us, for listening to us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel or Spotify if you prefer to listening, and I'll see you next week.